Hello dear based players of a groundbreaking game. Welcome to another episode of Stationeers News. It's 2025, March the 12th, and today we're going to take a short look at the upcoming new terrain system. It has now finally been evolved far enough to also be used by the rest of the developers of Stationeers. This, for example, is the most recent footage we got, and is Dean Hall, the CEO, whose nickname is Rocket, hence Rocketworks, demonstrating the current state of this new system. Here's what he had to say when he posted this on the 12th of February.
More work in progress terrain. Note that this is at the same resolution as our terrain so far, but we are experimenting with making it twice as detailed. In this video, you see me in the game, hopping out of the landing capsule, mining some terrain and walking around. This is a very small terrain compared to what we have planned. You can see the performance and much else is substantially better. We'll post results of our increased detail attempts as well.
This hasn't happened yet, so that's not going to be in this video. So this terrain is way more performant, better looking, and will have higher voxel resolution. By the way, please excuse some glitches you may see on screen. On the one hand, the terrain system is not fully finalized, for example when it comes to level of detail stuff, things that change in the distance. And on the other hand, this video originally had half the resolution and half the frame rate, and particularly doubling the frame rate created some visual glitches. Here is a side-by-side comparison. I think the improved feel justifies the trade-off. Now you will probably be most delighted to hear that the worlds we're gonna play in will have a spherical feel. From what I've heard, confirmed by Dean Hall himself, there will be a spherical shader that will give the impression as if you're indeed on a round world, which I'm trying to demonstrate here by showing this clip of the gloriously beautiful game Astroneer, which you should absolutely have played. It is unique, though its mechanics, while still complex, are way below those of Stationeers, so the natural progression should be first play Astroneer, then play Stationeers. So in addition to being double the voxel resolution that you can currently see on screen, which is the same resolution we've been having for a while with the old terrain system, we'll also have a feel of a spherical planet or moon. I will just bluntly assume that the strength of this geometry can be different depending on which world you play on. I mean, why not have basically a small asteroid? But that's not all. These two images show what a planet's atmosphere may look like in the new system. On the 4th of November 2024, in regards to the size of the new finite terrain, Rocket said,
I believe currently it was 4 by 4 kilometers, but I could be mistaken.
The most recent information I heard, and I don't know the exact date, was 8 by 8 kilometers, and also they explicitly said that this would not be a hard limit, but worlds could also be bigger or smaller.
Also, that's just one dimension. This kind of thing allows us to open up space. In the same way, Oxygen Not Included has a limited map, but tremendous potential to explore.
Now about the timeline, the new terrain system should be available on the beta channel, which is what I've been playing for a year now, in a couple of weeks. So it will probably be available there at some point in March 2025. How long it'll be until the next official update with the new terrain system, I have no idea. You have to remember though, the standard worlds that come with Stationeers, Moon, Mars, Europa and so forth, all have to be remade. And we're not just talking parameters for a new system, but these worlds will all be handcrafted. So before there will be a new official release, which you know Rocketworks tries to drop every month or so, quite some more time will have to pass. I mean, they can release a new standard version very soon, but not with a new terrain system. That new system will be a major pull factor, is what they figure. Therefore, publishing it will be a strategic move. They can't make everybody turn their heads and then leave disappointed when those worlds are not available right away. Therefore, my estimation is that Stationeers with a new terrain system will officially be available not before May or June 2025. Which brings us to some very important facts about Stationeers and its versions. See, once the new terrain update drops, all your old worlds will no longer be playable. At least I have no information that Rocketworks would still support the old terrain system for legacy purposes. You must rather assume that all your old worlds will be dead. But thankfully, you can just play older versions using Steam. And even if you've bought Stationeers on itch, on which it has been available for a few months now, because you wanted to support them, because here, Rocketworks gets 90% of the revenue instead of only 50%, you will also get a Steam key, so you can unlock the game on Steam and benefit from the convenient beta selection menu and its automatic downloading. Though if this is the way you obtained your Steam key, a Steam review you write about Stationeers will not count to its overall review score. At least I'm 95% sure that this is so. Now let's look at this beta selection menu. Sadly, it's not sorted in any meaningful temporal way, even though that would make the most sense here. So let me just change that. Num 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 num. Num 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 num. Okay, Of course, there's the beta branch, which is always the newest public release that comes out about daily, and I've been playing that for a year now. It's super stable and there was rarely ever a problem that I've experienced. Take that, billion-dollar companies with your buggy mess 1.0 releases. So, there's the dev branch. That's not for us. My assumption is that this is what the developers of Stationeers are currently using, and that this is indeed what we're seeing Rocket play right here on screen. A few months ago, there was still the previous pre-phase change entry, which allowed us to rewind the Stationeers clock to early 2023, when phase change wasn't yet a thing. In that version, all the old tutorials, which now no longer exist, were still 99% working, and you could even still create custom worlds. For example, a Lulan-like planet with spawned structures, though this entry has, like I said, been removed. Then there's the pre-Rocket Refactor update, which is the next newest entry after the now removed pre-phase change entry. The Rocket Refactor came out in December 2023, and since then we've been able to build rockets dynamically out of dedicated small grid parts, which is the same system that the Stationeers developer team is considering to use for the planned nuclear power update, when we'll be able to build nuclear reactors. I don't know who needs that kind of power in vanilla Stationeers, but I'm sure it'll come in handy once the probably full-priced Terraforming expansion will be out that may employ machinery that requires that kind of power, but this is just me guessing. The next newest entry on the list is the Pre-Terrain Rework Update. This one was added at some point in 2024 when the devs started changing and adding things about planetary atmospherics, which will come into play in the Terraforming expansion, which will definitely come. I don't know exactly why they chose to call it Pre-Terrain Rework Update, since work on the new terrain system had been underway for a while at that point, but was still far away from being released onto the general developer branch, let alone to our desktops. But anyway, that's the way it is. And I believe that was roughly the time when the previous pre-phase change entry was removed. And instead, we now have the entry previous version before latest updates. And this is the one you now have to pay attention to, please. When the new terrain system is officially being released into the public, not just on the beta channel, where, like I said, it will probably arrive during March, all your old worlds will break. You can't play them anymore. But hey, not a problem, right? You can just switch to previous version before the latest update. And please don't forget to turn off autosave, else you'll pretty surely regret it when you're version hopping. So then you can just save your game by pressing F5 or using quick save in the menu or creating a full new save game, all of which have their own saving history, as you know. But here's the problem. Eventually, there will be another public release, maybe just 1 month later, who knows. Doesn't have to be something as big as nuclear power, could just be some improvements, some fixes, some polishing. What will happen then is that the public terrain release version will be moved to this particular entry, version before the latest update. And that means that you can no longer play your old Stationeers worlds at all, except if you're willing to go as far back as pre-terrain rework update and such. And those entries may also eventually vanish. What I'm saying is, you should absolutely create backups of your Stationeers installation folder, ideally from a clean installation, since just validating the game files with Steam will not get rid of potentially problematic mod files and binaries. Basically, when you have a problem that may be related to mods, we have to nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. So create backups of those full releases, else they will eventually drift out of reality and you will never see them again. Thankfully, Stationeers doesn't have any kind of DRM, which is also why I started via its executable every time, because even though I've turned off Steam Cloud for Stationeers, my over 10,000 save games will always still be checked against the cloud status when I start Stationeers with Steam. That must be a bug in the Steam client, because there's no justification to do such a thing. But hey, you don't have to deal with that, just start the executable directly. Rocket Station exit. It will still count your game time in Steam, if the Steam client is already running when you start the game. By the way, some information about Stationeers storage on your computer. Some people have complained that Stationeers saves its games in the documents tree, and they argued that the saved games tree would be more appropriate, and that it may, for example, cause less interference by OneDrive. To this, Rocket most recently said,
"We try to keep all our stuff very standardized. All our games are supposed to follow the same processes for this, and roughly do. The only exception currently is Icarus, but we don't want to change that as it affects existing customers."
Personally, I think why not change it? The executable could just check both locations and then use the legacy one if there's some data there, else it would just use the new one. So regarding the save game location and such, he says,
"People can overwrite it easily themselves if they need to. The standard is currently the My Games folder inside of the My Documents folder. It's very unlikely to change given how much we've used it so far. There are multiple ways you can tell Stationeers to use a different location for save and settings files."
I don't know exactly what ways he's referring to. One, for example, is to write in the setting XML file, which is indeed in the My Documents My Games location, where the path shall be for the saved games. So that would solve that angle. Rocket also pointed to a Reddit thread discussing just this problem. Where should games store their saved game files? He says,
"We ran through this and decided on a standard documents/mygames/name of the game. Unfortunately, I didn't check Icarus before it released, so we just left it storing in app data, which I strongly disagree with. It's a hard spot to find for many users."
Of course, I personally don't care about something not being findable. I just open everything by Void Tools and instantly find whatever I want to find. It's free, and if you don't have it, you're doing it wrong. So that should settle the Stationeers save game placement debate. Now, while we're mentioning Stationeers not having any DRM, as in anyone could copy this, and indeed Dean Hall himself suggested that you should if you want to demo the game, but then of course you should either delete it or pay for it, since they can't be burdened to support yet another development branch, for a demo. Maybe you should know the monetary situation. We should take a look at the Rocketworks financials, part of which are posted by Rocket himself relatively often on the Stationeers Discord. This is the most recent information we have, from the 4th of February 2025. This is the lifetime gross revenue, that's total sales, price times quantity, nothing deducted yet. Of this, Rocketworks ultimately gets about 50%. Net revenue would be gross revenue minus sales returns, allowances and discounts. Then there's gross profit, that's the net revenue minus costs of goods sold. Then there's operating income, that's this gross profit I just mentioned, minus operating expenses like salaries, office space rent, utilities, marketing, etc. The net income or net profit is the operating income minus interest expenses and income taxes. This is the bottom line. I don't know what Rocket referred to when he said of this gross revenue we get about 50%. Did he mean net revenue, gross profit, operating income, net income? My assumption would be gross profit. In other words, what's not yet subtracted from that is rent, salaries, utilities, marketing, etc. Because he said, for example, the bobbleheads, which are meant to be basically pure donation buttons, have not yet made the money back that was invested to make them happen, mostly because of salaries. So let's look at these numbers. Stationeers DLC revenue, $330,000. Of this, the Human Cosmetics pack, about $60,000. The Hard Suit bobblehead, almost $4,000. The Marine bobblehead, about $3,000. The EVA suit bobblehead, about $5,500. The International Uniforms pack, about $31,000. The Cerulean Species DLC, about $86,000. And the Hemdroid Species DLC, about $150,000. Of course, when we look at the ratios, the percentages, we have to consider how long these have been out respectively. Hemdroid and Cerulean pack are rather old, and I think the Cerulean pack is the most important one because it adds quite some gameplay value due to the fact that you're breathing in volatiles and breathing out N2O, which together is the most potent fuel Stationeers has. But you still eat potatoes and have to protect all of that stuff from your personal toxic atmosphere. The Hemdroid Species pack alleviates the need for an atmosphere because you just need to keep your battery fresh, no breathing involved. The International Uniforms pack came out much later, as did the Human Cosmetics pack. The bobbleheads are only 3 or 4 months old. Hey, we can actually do some math here. So Rocket published these numbers a few weeks ago, on the 4th of February 2025. I think he also published the total revenue for the base game at some point, but I can't be bothered to find this now, also it would not be information relating to this date. Anyway, that was about 2,600 days before he published these numbers. The Cerulean and Hemdroid Species DLC was published about 2,000 days ago, Human Cosmetics about 900 days, International Uniforms about 400 days, and then the 3 bobbleheads about 130 days ago. So if we order these from younger to older and also from less to more revenue, we get a pretty clear picture. The least successful DLC was the Marine bobblehead with about $23 per day. The Hard Suit, way more attractive, almost $29 a day. The EVA suit bobblehead, the suit we all start with, about $41 per day. That's significantly more appreciated. I think the psychology here is, people felt, hey, I want to buy a bobblehead, but I only want to buy the most significant one instead of all 3, I guess. Then there's the International Uniforms pack, which came out almost at the same time as the Rocket Refactor update with almost $75 per day. Why am I saying US dollars? Because often enough, when Rocket published such numbers, he expressly said that it's US dollars. In this case he didn't, so I'll just assume that. Then, even older, the Human Cosmetics pack, almost $63 per day. That's somewhat less than the International Uniforms pack. What does this mean? Well, maybe that people decided what they want to look like in Stationeers and then they just stuck with that look because they got accustomed to it. And so when the option came to look differently, that was of interest, but many old players would just stick with the appearance they had chosen already. I'm just guessing, obviously. The International Uniforms pack was possibly this successful not just because it made much sense when we played together, so everybody could express themselves and where they originate in a new way. Also, it gave more reason to strip away the spacesuit, so that you live in a station and make a habitat. And this would be equally interesting to new and old players. Also, I've been with Stationeers since about the last third of 2023, and personally, I got the impression at least around December 2023 that there was great enthusiasm around its progression, and so the international uniforms were kind of a no-brainer to obtain. But again, I'm just guessing. And then, about double as old as the Human Cosmetics pack, the Cerulean and Hemdroid species. Hemdroid about $72, which could then be called the most successful DLC, even though it's not at the very top of the daily revenue, since it had such a long run to eventually fall out of favor. And maybe it did. What we're seeing here is just an equalized number. I don't know the curve. But anyway, it appears the people appreciate a lot the option to just play with battery dependency, instead of having to put up with the need to breathe and to feed yourself. They just wanted to engineer. Again, just a guess. At this point, you should know that you can play Stationeers with all three species at the same time in a single-player game by switching. I save my game and exit to menu. I find the world.xml of the save game. Save games, by the way, will at some point in the future be zip compressed, is something that Rocket said most recently. And I search for the term Steam ID, which will be found often, many times with just a 0. But if there's a very long number, that's your personal 64-bit Steam ID number, which is not a secret. Now, what you have to do is to replace this Steam ID across the entire XML save game, which of course can be automated and can be made more smartly by playing it safe and including also the greater than and less than character, though it's basically impossible that this very same number occurs in a different context where you would not want to replace it. Well, and you replace it with a different number, for example, just incremented by 1. Save, load your game, and now you'll drop in with a landing capsule, because it's no longer your game, it's someone else's save game, and there's no reason that this shouldn't work as a different species. So in other words, with this trick, you could play as 3 different species in the same game. For example, you could start your game as the robot who prepares everything for the human. Then the human comes down and builds the real station. And then you prepare some hotel-like situation, and the next thing that comes down is the Cerulean, which you also play yourself. I think that's a nice idea. Maybe you want to try that. I find it a bit sad that the Cerulean species pack has not seen more sales, because it's really very cool to be confronted with the additional engineering tasks that the requirement to breathe in volatiles and breathe out N2O brings with it. I mean, we're here for the engineering adventure, aren't we? Well, so have an engineering adventure then. So, some more details about this revenue. Rocket also said that an employee costs them about $500 a day in total, even more for senior developers, which adds up quickly. And that making more bobbleheads would become too expensive, since they haven't made their money back yet. He assumes, though, that the new terrain system, and then at some point afterwards, the Terraforming expansion, might give Stationeers a chance to get some good revenue. Terraforming is definitely coming. You can even see some of the terraforming equipment already in the Stationpedia. As you know, some things show up in the Stationpedia that are no longer actually in the game, legacy stuff, and for the same reason, new things that are not yet released into the wild also show up in the Stationpedia. Here, for example, we have the carbon sequester. The image obviously doesn't yet exist, so they just used the advanced furnace asset. No idea if the device will stay like this, but currently the plan appears to be that it will consume 20 kilowatts. That's by far the strongest consumer ever seen in Stationeers. Presumably, the sequester will harvest CO2 from the atmosphere and will thus reduce the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is something already implemented in Stationeers. For example, I recently uploaded a playthrough video where I changed the Martian atmosphere, and since it was too cold, I just added a lot of CO2, which heated it up quite a lot. Then we have some equipment for the carbon sequester, some more. Here, the dispersal tower, again with some graphics that don't belong here. Presumably, the dispersal tower will be a thing that adds gases to the planet atmosphere, so that you can change it. I don't know why that would have to be a thing, since we can already release gases into the atmosphere just fine. But I have no clue what the Rocketworks team is really doing here, and they will certainly have some kind of plan. The Terraforming expansion will be full priced, and of course it's a total no-brainer to buy it. It will expand the Stationeers experience to planetary scale. And there's the industrial burner. Whatever that really will do. Maybe it's a thing that produces tons of CO2. But what's the industrial combustor then? Anyway, there's the industrial filtration, a device with 6 gas filters. And in the video I mentioned you can also see some early draft of planetary plants. Greenery all over the place. Rocket said also on the 4th of February,
Yep, 100% coming. Most of the code work is done and most of the assets have been made. I think, at least first pass. But we want terrain refactor out so that when you have terraformed, there can be some visual change to the world. However, I should say the current plan is to not actually release the expansion until either after or at the time of a version 1.0 launch of Stationeers, which in turn will only happen once both we feel we are ready for 1.0 and the community votes in favor as well. And my big issue with 1.0 is people then assuming we are done, which will not be the case.
In other words, they will keep going. And this sounds very reasonable, if you think about it. A real Stationeer player like myself would want them to keep going, so I'm personally not interested at all in a 1.0 release. But by tying the Terraforming expansion to the 1.0 release, they give all of us something to look forward to regarding 1.0, else the community might not at all come together to agree that a 1.0 label is now warranted at some point. We have to all understand Rocketworks will keep developing this game, if they can. And if they can doesn't mean profitable, since Stationeers has been cross-financed by Icarus for a long time now. On the 4th of November 2024, Rocket said,
We generally don't see a need for Stationeers to be financially successful in the same way as Icarus is. This is because Stationeers teaches the studio a great deal and also builds super fans.
Yes, it does.
Some things we make are very financially successful, cost-benefit wise. Cosmetic DLC for Icarus often make more revenue to Stationeers per day, but cost us nothing to run. I do think that with a terrain refactor and a few more updates, Stationeers could sell a few 100,000 more units. That would be a lot of money.
When he compared Icarus DLC revenue to Stationeers, I'm not sure if he meant Stationeers as a whole, Stationeers the base game only, or only its DLC, because the sentence says, often make more revenue to an Stationeers per day. See, that's a bit ambiguous. On the same day he said,
Stationeers, while not a financial powerhouse in the studio, has probably contributed more to the studio's direction of time in learning and change than any other project. Icarus probably was the key level up for the studio and gave us the money to stop selling shares and start focusing on what we wanted to do longer term.
And here's another small news item. Very recently, Rocketworks changed Stationeers to now allow overriding definitions that already exist in the core game. This is true at least in the case of worlds and custom difficulties. In other words, now you can create custom worlds and custom difficulties via XML files like you should in your Stationeers save folder, or rather next to it in the mods folder that you would have to create yourself, that override existing game worlds and existing difficulties, replacing them. This was not possible before and will throw an exception. Now it can be done. However, all modded worlds and difficulties will have this indicator in the Stationeers menu, so you can distinguish them from the official stuff. And that's all I have for you today.